Hello. So today we're going to talk about reviewing research, publication, and writing a discussion. As in the past, we're going to do this in several different pieces so that there's little shorter versions for you guys to look at, not so hard to download. Okay. So we're talking about research here in this class, so we want to think about how it is that we evaluate the research that we produce, that other people produce. This is also good prep, and the reason that we're talking about it tonight or now is because we are going to be doing a peer review next week. So in writing your paper this week, you can be thinking about how the reviewers are going to be looking at it when they get it next week. So why do we evaluate research? One of the reasons is to design related studies. So if we are trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work in previous studies, we want to evaluate what they did that worked, what they did that didn't. We evaluate research to figure out how to set up our lit review for our introduction. So in looking at the background on a specific topic, we would be looking at and evaluating previous research. We also evaluate peers' research for publication. We'll talk a little bit more about the publication process a little bit later in another clip this week. Another reason for evaluating research is because it's interesting to us. So seeing how other people have done what they've done, looking at the tools that they used. These are important for personal interest in the research. Okay, so let's talk about how we evaluate research. One of the first things we want to think about is who the research is coming from. So where it is, what's the source? So if I am a researcher at a public university, a private university, a lot of the research that I'm going to be doing is part of my job. Professors are evaluated on research, teaching, and our collegiality, our service to the university. So one of those three legs, and depending on which university you're at, so it's different kind of weights on those. One of those three legs is looking at how much research we do. So that's what is motivating a university professor. What their topic is somewhat motivated by what's their interest, what's hot in the fields, what's getting published, but also where money's coming from. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's important to consider, if someone is not a researcher, what their goals might be, right? Is it part of their job? Are their goals maybe influencing the kinds of results they're interested in finding? We also want to be very skeptical in terms of how we evaluate research. We tend to consider researchers as authorities, and we don't want to do this here when we're evaluating research, because we want them to have to explain to us exactly how they found what they found. It's not enough to just say, this is the way it is. The next thing to consider is evaluating methods. And we've talked a little bit about methods in this class, but we're wanting to look at the sample, the procedure, coding, and measures. So how did they sample? Who's in this? Who did they look at? The procedure, what did they do? Does it make sense? How did they code? Some times we may disagree with how people valued things on their coding, and that's a reasonable critique for an evaluation, either if you're evaluating for publication or evaluating to figure out whether you want to use it for your own introduction, your own research background. Similarly, what measures did they use? If you are using pre-existing measures in a survey type study, you want to see, do those measures make sense? So I want to give you an example about being critical of sampling. We often talk about sampling and we think, okay, well, there weren't enough people, right? Okay, That's one of the things. There weren't enough people, or there were not a representative group of people. That's part of it. The other part, and what I'm going to talk to you about here in this example, is what's missing. Who's missing, right? Okay, so this example is about the Navy trying to figure out how to best to kind of retrofit and support their airplanes. So what parts of the airplanes after World War II, what parts of the planes do we need to reinforce? What do we need to have more metal around? What do we need to make sure that we are supporting well? And they ran an analysis with the planes that they had recovered from World War II, looking at where planes had likely been shot. There's a picture up here. You can see bullet patterns on planes that were recovered. So obviously, what the first inclination was, oh, well, it looks like the wingtips are the places that need to be reinforced. Some of that back behind the engines, also on the body of the plane, needs to be reinforced. However, a statistician looked at this and said, you guys got it all wrong. The problem here is a problem of sampling, right? Because if you notice the sample here, we have no shots fired, none of these planes in the sample had taken any damage to the engines nor the cockpit. That's crazy, right? Like if you're gonna find, if there's something that's gonna be tremendously wrong and what you wanna reinforce on a plane, it would be the engines that keep it up in the air and the pilot that knows how to keep it up in the air. So what Abraham Wald suggested here is that the sampling was the problem. These planes that they had recovered were the ones that they had recovered, right? So the ones that were not in the sample, that they weren't looking at, were the ones with much more important data. The ones that had been shot down, the ones that had been shot down and weren't recovered because they were in bits all over the place, right? Those were the ones where the pilot had been hit, right? The cockpit, or one of the engines. So it was important to notice not only for your sample, again, who's there. Is it a representative sample? Is it proportional? Is it too small to really tell anything from? But also, what's missing? Who's missing? Who's there, but also who's missing? Okay? Okay. So let's go back to our how do we evaluate research? So anecdotes are not data. It's important to keep in mind that everyone has a cousin, a sister, or somebody that had something happen to them. That's not evidence in the same way that we look for in research. We also have talked about this before. We'll say it again over and over. Correlation is not causation. There's lots of ways that you can get a relationship between two variables, between two phenomena that doesn't have to do with a direct causal relationship between those two. Be skeptical of anybody that's telling you about cause. They deserve to be looked at skeptically if they're going to claim cause, because you have to do a lot to prove that there's a cause there. Okay, the last thing here, follow the money. Who's paying for it? This is a little bit harder to do, but most journals require that folks talk about or give some information on major grants that helped to fund any research that they publish. So if Coca-Cola suggests that it is as important to safe driving that you are sober and haven't drinking alcohol as it is that you are not dehydrated. I heard something like a claim like that recently, that dehydration was as dangerous for driving as driving drunk, right? Studies supported by and funded by Coca-Cola, who owns a bunch of companies that make bottled water. Yeah, so of course they found that. It was in their best interest. I maybe severe dehydration. I don't know what they did. I can't look at the study specifically, but just from the findings, I'm skeptical, right? Okay. Come to meeting.